Opposition leaders are pressing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for reassurance after U.S. President-elect Donald Trump dropped his biggest threat against Canada in years.
Where's the plan to stop the drugs and keep our border open to trade?
The only thing a bully responds to is strength. So where is our plan to fight back?
We're going to continue to work constructively with the incoming administration to protect Canadian jobs, to protect Canadian growth.
The Minister of Public Safety, Dominic LeBlanc, is here with the federal response. Hi, Minister. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, JP. Thanks for having me.
So what is Canada doing to stop what could be a catastrophic blow to the economy? What's the plan?
The plan is to continue to do the work that we've been doing over the last number of months to prepare for this kind of scenario and a number of others. We believe that there are many economic and security reasons why the new Trump administration will conclude that this measure is unnecessary and punitive in terms of their own economic interest. We're looking forward to having conversations with the incoming administration. The Prime Minister spoke to President Trump last evening, but we think, a good story to tell the Americans about the importance of the free trade between Canada and the United States. And I think I have a good story with RCMP and CBSA and other law enforcement agencies to tell them in terms of our shared priorities and objectives at the border.
Yeah, you're talking there, I think, about the Team Canada approach, how ministers and the ambassador have kind of been fanning out across the United States, meeting with politicians in dozens of states, I take it. Pierre Poilievre said today, the Conservative leader, that that was essentially a useless exercise, that all you've accomplished is photo ops and chit-chat with politicians, and you didn't prevent something like what Trump tweeted last night from happening. What do you say to him?
Well, I'm not surprised that Mr. Poilievre has a simplistic solution. He specializes in those. Managing a relationship as important to Canada and the United States as the Canada-U.S. economic and security relationship is built at so many levels. So I spoke to business leaders yesterday who talked to me about conversations they had with American governors and business leaders who were people that would have known and worked with Mr. Trump in business capacities. Premiers, Doug Ford, the Premier of Yukon spoke to me this week about conversations they're having with governors. So all of us are leaning in to do the work that Canadians would expect us to do. The Prime Minister obviously speaking to Mr. Trump last evening is critical. There are going to be more conversations like that. But all of us have a role to play, we think, in telling the American administration how we share their concern around border security and border integrity, and showing the American administration that punitive tariffs like this will in fact have negative effects on the American economy as well.
Speaking of the economy, do you have to go back to the drawing board when you're drafting the fall economic statement and consider what impact these tariffs would have? Because I imagine your past projections are really out of date if we do have to face a 25% tariff on all our goods.
So again, the Minister of Finance is the best person to answer that. I know that she has, as chair of the Canada-U.S. Cabinet Committee, been reflecting on this work for some time. She had a critical role to play in successfully resolving similar tariffs, albeit at a lower level, but a similar circumstance in the previous Trump administration. I know that she has been, and the whole government has been, planning for a number of contingencies, but we hope very much, JP, that we can tell a constructive and positive story to the Americans, show them the work that we're doing with them economically and in terms of the security relationship, and ultimately avoid the arrival of these tariffs.
If they don't like that story that you're telling, though, are you prepared to retaliate? Are we going to go back to the strategy that we used in the first Trump term of slapping retaliatory tariffs on some of their goods? Is that what you're planning for?
And the Minister of Finance talked about that earlier today. We very much hope that that won't be necessary. But any responsible country that wants to stand up for our own economic interests and the Canadian economy and Canadian workers has to prepare for all these eventualities. But we're a long way away from having to make that decision. But the planning is obviously done and being done. We're focused on showing the Americans, both in a security context and an economic context, why this will not be helpful to the American economy and why we can jointly manage the security concerns that they have and that we share together in a way that will keep the two countries safe, as it has for decades.
Yeah, on the security concerns, and he cited the border, Trump in his tweet last night as why he is moving ahead or threatening to move ahead with these tariffs. I looked at some of the numbers from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Obviously, the number of illegal migrants entering the U.S. from Canada is a fraction of what it is at the southern border in the United States. But we have seen a notable uptick in the number of people that are crossing from Canada into the U.S. It's gone from about 89,000 in 2022 to nearly 200,000 last year. So we are talking about an increase in traffic. What does the federal government have to do now to try to bring those numbers down to appease Trump, who is so fixated on those numbers?
So, and again, we understand the basic American concern because it's one that we share, that countries get to decide who comes into their country, and it has to happen through lawful pathways, through legal means. So that the Americans assert that to us is understandable. We share that concern about our own country. The Minister of Immigration has made a number of changes around visas for persons coming, for Mexicans on direct flights from Mexico. He's made changes in terms of some of the visa issuing with respect to direct flights coming from India. That has brought those numbers down. If you look at the period between June and September in some key sectors, the numbers are diminishing and diminishing considerably, but those numbers need to keep coming down. So we'll continue to take responsibility both from an immigration perspective, and Mark Miller, my colleague, indicated that he's also prepared to take additional measures in that regard. And the Canadian Border Services Agency and the RCMP share intelligence information with their American counterparts, the FBI, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. There's information sharing every day. There are joint operations at different parts of the border to ensure that it's secure. So that work goes on literally, JP, every day. And we're going to continue to give them the resources they need, the Canadian law enforcement authorities, to do this work with the Americans. So we're confident, again, that we can show the Americans how seriously we take this concern and ensure that they have confidence in the good work that's being done both by Canadian and American police authorities.
Why is the Prime Minister still the best person to deal with President-elect Trump on these issues?
Because, first of all, he's had experience in the previous Trump administration in successfully managing that relationship. He's a leader that's respected. Other G7 leaders, other global leaders know that the Prime Minister has stood up for Canadians and Canadian interests in an effective way. And I have every confidence that his relationship with Mr. Trump and the relationship with American senators, American governors, lawmakers, is such that we'll be able to effectively advocate for Canadians, as we did in the past. But you mentioned earlier that Mr. Poilievre sort of dismissed the work that was done by premiers and by federal ministers and business leaders to strengthen and identify relationships that could be in the interest of defending Canada. We think that's work that we're going to continue to do.
John, the reason why I ask is John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, who played a prominent role in Canada-U.S. relations last time, has said that Trump doesn't like Trudeau, that he does not feel he has a good relationship with him. He sent his people on television in the U.S. to trash the Prime Minister. We know there's been a rocky relationship between Trump and Trudeau. Do you think that personal animus will stand in the way of the national interest?
Well, I'm not sure I accept the premise of personal animus. The Prime Minister talked about a constructive conversation he had yesterday with President Trump. They have met on a number of occasions. The job of the Prime Minister of Canada is to stand up for Canadian workers, the Canadian economy, our national security. But the good news is so much of that is also shared in a common purpose with the United States that we think the Prime Minister can very effectively, as he has in the past, make that case to American authorities. And commentators and former officials in a previous administration can offer whatever comments they want. Our focus will be to build a constructive, collaborative relationship with the incoming administration in the United States, because it's in Canada's interest that we do so.
Are you concerned about some of the premier's freelancing on Canada-U.S. relations, kind of pitching their own policy proposals. We heard from Doug Ford and Danielle Smith saying it might be in Canada's best interest to go it alone with the U.S., to cut Mexico out of the equation, tear up NAFTA, and have a bilateral deal. Does that undermine the Team Canada approach when you have some premiers doing their own diplomacy on these issues?
We don't think so. We, in fact, appreciate the fact that many Canadian premiers have developed with American governors, including some Republican governors that would be influential perhaps in a Trump administration, these relationships. We're encouraged. I've had a conversation with Premier Ford, who chairs the Council of the Federation. He is very, very adamant that we have to work together as a country. He wants to participate actively as other premiers do. We welcome that. In the past, Premier Ford and other premiers have been very effective at coordinating with the Government of Canada, a Team Canada approach. Prime Minister, as you know, is meeting virtually tomorrow evening, the premiers, other First Ministers. This will be the first conversation. There'll be other meetings. We hope to have in-person meetings in December with the premiers. We see this as a strength if premiers with relationships in the United States want to work with the Government of Canada. This is good for Canadian workers and our economy. So we're encouraged by that.
Is there not a risk, though, that undermines the national cohesion when you have multiple people saying different things about where Canada should be going? Does that not undermine the Prime Minister's negotiation position when he sits down with someone like President Trump?
Well, JP, you've been around a long time. The Prime Minister of Canada doesn't control what elected First Ministers say in terms of how they represent the interests of their province. The good news is many premiers tell us they want to work in a collaborative, constructive way as a country to send a unified message to the American administration. The President of the United States is not responsible for what individual governors would say. This is the nature of a federation. But on this issue, because it's so important to Canadians and the Canadian economy, we're very confident, and the comments from Premier Ford and other premiers, my conversations, I've spoken to half a dozen premiers in the last 48 hours, I'm extremely encouraged by their desire to work collaboratively amongst themselves under Premier Ford's leadership at the Council of the Federation and with the Government of Canada. So we're very optimistic.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to the Minister of Public Safety, Dominic LeBlanc. Appreciate you coming in, sir.
Thanks, JP.
We're joined now by the Conservative House Leader, Andrew Scheer, for some reaction. Hi, Andrew. Thanks for coming on.
You bet. Great to be here.
So Pierre Poilievre was saying today that the Prime Minister should put partisanship aside and focus on the national interest, focus on what matters most to Canada and the economy and jobs. But he kind of dumped all over the Prime Minister when he was making his remarks today. Is there a risk that undermines kind of the national cohesion, the national unity, when we do have to negotiate with Donald Trump because we're not necessarily presenting a united front?
Quite the contrary. It's necessary to point out what Justin Trudeau has done to put Canada in such a weak position. We need a Canada First plan to fix what Justin Trudeau has broken. When you look at how he's crippled our economy with the carbon tax that he keeps increasing while the U.S. doesn't have one at all, he's bringing in an investment tax on capital gains, which again sends foreign direct investment to other countries. So right at the time that Donald Trump is doing everything he can to bring jobs and investments to the U.S., Justin Trudeau has been helping him for the last few years, and we've seen the results. We've seen wages go up in the U.S. while they've remained flat here. We've seen food prices rise 37% faster in Canada than in the U.S., and Canada is now has the most indebted household. So Canadian households are carrying more debt than families in other countries that we trade with. So it's essential that we get Justin Trudeau to put aside his ideological fixation on these policies that have done so much damage to Canada so that we can be in a stronger position to deal with the Trump administration.
The reason I ask is, you served with Aaron O'Toole, the past Conservative leader, and he was quite deferential almost to the Prime Minister, to Justin Trudeau, when he was in that job, and he was saying he was part of Team Canada and he would not criticize the Prime Minister when he was outside of Canada. Is Pierre Poilievre taking a different approach? Does he feel like it's in the best interest of the country to maybe point out Justin Trudeau's failings as opposed to just going along with what he's pitching?
Well, Canada needs a Prime Minister with the brains and the backbone to deal with this issue. And our leader, Pierre Poilievre, is demonstrating that. He's calling out out what Justin Trudeau has done to cause so much damage to our economy, to weaken us so much, to do Donald Trump's job for him in many ways by chasing away investments in Canada. Take the production cap on Western Canadian energy. Right at a time when an incoming U.S. president says that he wants to lower gas prices for Americans, Trudeau comes along and says, well, we're going to put a cap and a limit on what we can produce. So we're going to be selling less of what the U.S. is looking to buy right at a time that we're dealing with these the proposed tariffs. So I'm extremely proud of our leader, Pierre Poilievre, for calling this out, because it's necessary. When you've got a prime minister that is doing this kind of economic vandalism, weakening our country, you need to call it out. And the onus is really on Justin Trudeau to put aside his blind partisanship and ideological fixation on things like a production cap on oil and gas, on a carbon tax, and on these taxes on investments, so that we can be in a stronger position when we sit down at the table.
Yeah, President Trump is not necessarily fixated on the production cap or the carbon tax. What he was concerned about in his tweet last night is the border and drugs. Obviously, the number of illegal migrants entering into the U.S. from Canada pales in comparison to the number that are coming from Mexico, coming across that southern border. But we have seen a fairly substantial uptick in the number of people leaving our country going into the U.S. The U.S. Customs and Border Patrol puts it at 200,000 encounters last year. So there is a problem that wasn't there before. What would the Conservative government do, if there is one after the next election, do to rein in the number of asylum seekers and refugees? Do you think that there need to be fewer of those people in this country?
Well, you are right to point out that that Trump mentioned those things specifically in his tweets, but it's important to talk about the things like the carbon tax and the production cap, because when investors are trying to get into our country and put dollars to work here and build factories and job sites to put Canadians to work, it strengthens our economy, and it means there are more people in the United States who want good trade relationships with our country. So it is important that we get our domestic house in order. On those two issues that you pointed out, it shouldn't take the U.S. president to spur Justin Trudeau to take action on something like the fentanyl crisis that's sweeping through our communities. Pierre Poilievre has been out on this for years now, talking about what Canada should do, not for the sake of U.S. politicians, but for the sake of the moms and dads who are grieving the loss of their children, for the sake of brothers and sisters who are missing out on loved ones because they've succumbed to this addiction crisis. And rather than tackle the drugs at the source at our ports, rather than cracking down on drug distribution and things like that, Justin Trudeau actually legalized the consumption of these hard drugs in many communities. And in doing so, he sent a very terrible signal around the world, but he's caused so much harm and misery in our communities. Taxpayer-funded opioids are ending up in police raids all across the country. So, and again, on the border issue, as you point out, Justin Trudeau has admitted that he's broken the immigration system. It's not just an uptick in incidents at the U.S. border, it's also an uptick in all kinds of problems that he has allowed the immigration system to cause. So, for example, over 4 million people are in Canada with visas that are set to expire. Justin Trudeau said his plan is that he's just going to kind of rely on the honor system to make sure that they all comply and leave when their permits expire. I don't believe that's going to be good enough.
I just want to nail you down, though, on this asylum seekers issue, because that's really what Trump cares about, right? He cares about the flow of migrants into his country. And we know that we have a similar issue here in Canada. The number of asylum seekers has jumped from 50,000 to 130,000 over the last 7 years. Would a Conservative government put a cap on the number of asylum seekers that can be in this country? Would you do more to expel people who are coming here to seek refuge?
Well, we would definitely take the border more seriously than Justin Trudeau has. Remember, he called anyone who was demanding better screening and vetting processes, greater ability to remove people who are abusing our asylum system. He called them all racist. He allowed at least 2 ISIS-related terrorists to enter into the country under his watch. He took months, years, to ban the IRGC, a known and listed terrorist organization that our allies around the world moved much quicker on. So there are many aspects about border security, proper vetting and background checks that Justin Trudeau has completely dropped the ball on. And Canadians should want that addressed for our own domestic reasons. Again, it shouldn't take the threats of these tariffs to spur Justin Trudeau to act. But here we are. So that's why our leader, Pierre Poilievre, went out today and outlined details on what Justin Trudeau should be doing to strengthen Canada's position and address some of these issues.
The other thing that Trump is fixated on is our defense spending, which we know we've been a laggard for many years. You were a laggard under the Conservative government. We're a laggard under this Liberal government. Would the Conservative government, if there is one after the next election, speed up the timeline to reach that 2% of GDP on defense spending to meet our NATO obligations? As it is right now, Trudeau has said we will reach that in 2032. Would a Conservative government do it sooner than that?
Well, you got half of that right when you led into this topic. Nobody was talking about Canada being a laggard when the Conservative Party was in government.
We were definitely below 2%.
We got heavy equipment delivered. We got heavy lift aircraft delivered. We got new supply ships built and delivered. We got tanks built and delivered, and we had started the process to upgrade our Air Force, and we fought shoulder to shoulder with our American allies in the fight against global terror.
We were still well below 1%, right? We were at 0.79 or whatever. It wasn't exactly a sterling record under the Conservative government. Right?
No, but when you get results, that's what matters. And when your allies appreciate the contributions you make in things like the fight against terror, we didn't have these kinds of conversations being had. We weren't being labeled as laggards by our allies. That all started with Justin Trudeau. He canceled procurement contracts and then admitted that he was wrong and had to restart them. He hasn't been able to deliver on this type of thing. So clearly, these are issues that have started under Justin Trudeau. 9 years ago, we had a Conservative government that was able to resolve the softwood lumber tariff issue. We didn't have steel tariffs slapped on us, and we certainly didn't have the problems that we saw when Justin Trudeau capitulated the first time he went head-to-head against President Trump. Justin Trudeau was forced to accept concession after concession because he completely mishandled the file. We're calling on him to drop his ideological obsession with his terrible policies that are causing so much damage, take this seriously, and come up with a plan. Where's the plan? We've known for over a year that Donald Trump would be that Donald Trump would be the Republican nominee. He's been president now for 3 weeks. We've seen this coming for months. Chrystia Freeland promised Canadians, the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, promised Canadians that everything would be fine. So where's the plan? Yeah. I haven't seen anything.
Well, they've been meeting with officials in the United States, right? This Team Canada approach, they've fanned out across the country, meeting dozens of lawmakers. But I really want to, just let's go back to this defense issue. Would a Conservative government meet the 2% of GDP spending target before 2032? All of our allies, or virtually all of them, are saying what we have planned now is not sufficient. Would a Conservative government do it sooner?
I definitely agree that what Justin Trudeau is doing is not sufficient. He's more fixated on changing the songs that our men and women in uniform sing when they march on parade than actually getting them the equipment they need and making sure that our levels of regular forces are where they need to be. What I can tell you, I know often journalists like to get sneak peeks on Conservative platforms. I can tell you that our party will absolutely point a way of how Canada will once again, like we were under the previous Conservative government, be a trusted ally, be in a position where we can get our troops to where they need to be in a position where we can contribute when we're called on to defend our allies. That will absolutely happen because it happened before.
Will the Conservative Party support retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods if Trump does go ahead with these proposed tariffs?
Our leader said this morning that if on a case-by-case basis, if necessary, we're hoping that we can avoid that type of thing. We're hoping that Justin Trudeau will listen to our appeals today and say, okay, look, the carbon tax isn't working. It's not working as an environment plan. It's not working as a domestic plan. All it's doing is chasing jobs and investment to the United States. You know what? We hope that he says that he's going to abandon his tax on investments to once again strengthen our economy here. Hopefully that he does those types of things and addresses some of the issues that have been brought up, and we avoid that type of.
So you think Trump won't impose his tariffs on Canada if we scrap the carbon tax? That's what you're proposing?
What I'm saying is that if Justin Trudeau made the types of changes necessary, if he abandoned parts of his the parts of his policies that have caused so much damage, it puts Canada in a much stronger position. When we have investors clamoring, fighting over each other to get into Canada, to invest in Canadian oil and gas production or manufacturing or shipping or logistics, then we've got more allies in the U.S. saying, hey, wait a second, we want trade, open trade with the United States. When we have a prime minister that imposes a production cap on our own products, a carbon tax that the U.S. doesn't have, and it's a major difference. It's going to go up to 61 cents a litre here, 0 in the United States. All those types of things weaken Canada's position at the negotiating table. So Justin Trudeau has some time to abandon his policies. Not much, though, because in less than 60 days, these tariffs may kick in. So we're hoping that he takes these types of moves, abandons those policies that have caused so much damage, and addresses some of the issues that have been brought up. And again, not for the sake of Donald Trump. Cracking down on fentanyl and cleaning up our communities from hard drugs that take the lives of Canadians, we should be doing that. Justin Trudeau should be doing that for the sake of Canadians. Ensuring that we have a safe border system, a safe immigration system, and strong borders is for Canadians' sake. We don't want people with terrorist links in our country for our own reasons. So these types of things he should be doing anyway. We hope he moves quickly on this.
Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer. Thanks for coming on, sharing your thoughts. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau plans to meet with provincial leaders tomorrow to discuss the incoming U.S. administration's threat of tariffs. President-elect Donald Trump announced last night that one of his first executive orders would be to impose a 25% tariff on all products imported from Canada and Mexico. Today, Trudeau emphasized the need for a Team Canada approach in response, while Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who is the chair of the Council of the Federation, had this to say ahead of tomorrow's meeting.
We look forward to hearing from the federal government and their plan. You cannot ignore the threat that we received last night at 6:35 p.m. It's the biggest threat we've ever seen in as far as we're concerned, in decades, more than decades. I could never remember a threat from a U.S. administration like we received today. It's unfortunate. It's very, very hurtful to Canadians and Americans.
For more provincial reaction, I'm joined now by the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith. Hi, Premier. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
So Donald Trump's tariffs have the potential to be really quite devastating for this country and its economy. I don't have to tell you, $3.5 billion worth of goods cross that border every day, a lot of it oil and gas. What's your reaction to what Trump's proposing here, Premier?
Well, we have to take him seriously. I mean, for him to say a 25% tariff would apply across the board, we have to listen to the things that are concerning for him. He wants us to meet our 2% NATO spending commitment. He wants us to address cross-border illegal trade in fentanyl, and he wants to also stop illegal migration, which he sees as being a problem with both Mexico and Canada. And so it's incumbent, I believe, on the federal government, along with all of the provinces, to work together to address those concerns if we want to be able to avoid these devastating tariffs that'll hurt all of us.
Do you think what he's proposing here is legitimate based on the drug argument? Because I was looking at some of the data from the US CBP, and there really isn't that much fentanyl that crosses over every year. It's only about 43 pounds. In Mexico, 22,000 pounds seized last year by border officials. So it's really not a big issue. It's certainly a problem if any fentanyl is going across, but he's certainly blowing it out of proportion, don't you think? Is there something else that's motivating him? Do you think perhaps it's maybe some personal animus towards the Prime Minister, for example?
Well, look, I think that we should be aiming to have zero fentanyl going across our borders. I think we certainly see that we've got our own fentanyl and opioid addiction crisis happening in Canada. It may well be that some of the product is coming across the border from the United States, the components, and then it's being manufactured and sent back across to the United States. We've got dual problems. We've got problems with gun smuggling coming across the border our way. We've got a problem with human trafficking coming across our border the other way. So I think that we have equal issues around the border that we have to address. I don't want to diminish the level of concern that the president has. I think we've got to solve it. We've had a revolving door of bad guys going into jail and then out of jail and then going back on the streets, committing crime, being involved in organized crime, being involved in this kind of activity. We can't pretend that it's not an issue. Obviously, the president is watching, and he doesn't want that seeping across the border. So I think that when the president has identified the things that he's concerned about, I think we should be doing what we can to identify how we're going to stop that flow.
Justin Trudeau said this morning that he did have a good call with Donald Trump last night. He got him on the phone. But do you have confidence in the Prime Minister's ability to navigate through this very tumultuous period for our country? Because we know they've had a rocky relationship in the past. It's not necessarily all good news between Trump and Trudeau.
Well, I think if there is going to be an improvement in the relationship, then Justin Trudeau is going to have to repudiate a lot of the bad policies that he's put in place over the last number of years that have caused this tension. The open border immigration policy that he had, bringing in 1.8 million people in 2022, 2023, and the Americans have seen a surge of people sneaking across the border. That is a bad policy that he put in place, and he's got to address it. The revolving door of criminals, that was again bad policy that he put in place, and it's hamstringing a lot of our law enforcement to be able to address it as well. The fact that he hasn't met his NATO commitment despite previous promises, that is going to be a flashpoint for this president as we look at how dangerous the world has become. So, and in addition to that, the one thing that I have seen that Chrystia Freeland mentioned is that we have 60% of the American imports of energy come from Canada. Most of that is coming from Alberta. So if you want to lead with the energy message and the energy security message, we can't have carbon taxes. We can't have emissions caps. We can't have all of the punishing ways in which he's trying to keep oil and gas in the ground. So he's got to rethink a lot of the policies that he has if he's going to be taken seriously at that negotiating table.
You just laid out a litany of issues. Does that mean you feel like Justin Trudeau is not the best person to sit at that table with Donald Trump and broker some sort of deal?
Well, I think he's probably recognized that. My understanding, and we're looking into trying to get an idea of who the lead is on this. I gather Chrystia Freeland and Dominic LeBlanc are co-chairs of the committee. We've also heard that Francois-Philippe Champagne has been reaching out. So I think he's got an entire committee approach that he's taking in doing the reach out. But I don't think that we should underestimate the personal animus between these two leaders. And if he's not the right person to have at the negotiating table, we need to make sure that the right person is. But the bigger than that is we've got to make sure we're talking in terms of that the Americans are going to appreciate. The Americans have made it very clear what it is they want us to address in order to avoid tariffs. Those are the things we've got to address.
Should Canada be preparing to retaliate at this point? I know we did that last time when he slapped tariffs on steel and aluminum. We had some success with that policy approach. Do you think the federal government should be readying a tariff war?
Well, look, let's stop the leaky border first. Let's stop the illegal migration first. Let's stop the fentanyl first. Let's meet our NATO commitment first, and let's see where we get with the Americans. I think that the U.S. has legitimate issues that they have raised with us, and we've got to address those legitimate issues. I don't think that we can say, yeah, but, because quite frankly, the American economy is the strongest in the world. They can produce a lot of what they need to consume. We are very reliant on them, and they are in the position of being able to dictate terms. And so I suppose we could punish ourselves with tariffs, but I would say, why don't we take the approach of trying to figure out how to solve the things that are the trade irritants to them? That would be my first step.
During the NAFTA renegotiation, Canada was a united front against Trump's tariffs and threats. It does seem like you and Premier Doug Ford are freelancing a bit this time, coming up with your own policy proposals, maybe suggesting ways to appease Trump in some ways. Is there not a risk that this undermines the Team Canada approach? Shouldn't we all be singing from the same hymn book?
Well, I think that Doug Ford and I are aligned. I think we are singing from the same hymn book. And I think we are talking about the things that matter to Canadians. Canadians don't want the fentanyl crisis either. Canadians don't want illegal migration either. Canadians are distressed at how much we've been diminished on the international stage because we're not pulling our weight when it comes to our defense commitments. So I think that the approach that Doug and I have taken in voicing those concerns are actually voicing the concerns of Canadians. And I wish that I would see that the federal government would take those things seriously. You can't keep on going down this path and causing this much harm and not have it have an impact. It's having an impact. And it's going to hurt every single province who relies on a positive trade relationship with the United States. And it is up to the federal government to change gears so that we can address them.
You mentioned the border, you mentioned illegal crossings. We have some stats as well from the Customs and Border Protection folks. 2 million encounters at the Mexican border, 200,000 encounters at the northern border. But I take your point, it has doubled in the last 2 years. It went from about 89,000 to now 200,000 encounters, which is kind of a euphemism for illegal crossings, illegal migrants. What do you want the federal government to do to get that number down? What do you want them to actually implement to try and stop some of these encounters?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, we've asked for in Alberta more 24-hour border crossings working in conjunction with our counterparts. In Alberta, we're bordered entirely by Montana. The Montana governor, Jan Forte, and I wrote a joint letter asking for that so that we could have more border protection and more border observation for longer hours. We need a dedicated border patrol team that may include, since we've got such a long border, maybe it includes some drone technology so that we're able to monitor what is happening, where the sites of entry are, are, when we apprehend people, we need to send them home. We need to deport them. So I would say that those are the kind of things that we're expected to see. And it goes both ways, because I think what the Americans are observing, and your numbers show it, is that people have been coming to Canada with the purpose of sneaking into the United States. That's why we've gotten the attention of the border czar. Is he's realizing that if they don't stop this, it's going to continue to get worse and worse. And it's up to us to be a good neighbor and to make sure that we continue to have the longest undefended border by doing what we can to prevent that flow.
I want to end on the First Minister's meeting. You're poised to meet with the Prime Minister tomorrow. It's been a while since you've all sat around the same table, although I take it will be virtual tomorrow. What is your message to him as he navigates these choppy waters? What can he do to smooth things over?
Well, look, I'm going to lead from Alberta's interests. Alberta knows that we are the solution to the American energy security issues, and that is our strongest bargaining point. But we can't be bargaining from that position with things like an emissions cap and a production cap hanging over our heads. We can't be talking about how we're going to remain competitive if tariffs do come in, if he's continuing with a carbon tax that's going to add 61 cents a liter onto gasoline and diesel, and the capital gains tax changes that he's making. We are just going to see a flow of businesses that are leaving from Canada and going into the United States. He needs to understand how serious it is, the policy measures that he's taken, and do a quick reverse on a number of them, meet the Americans in the areas where they are concerned, alleviate those concerns, and then hopefully we can get on to talking about trade issues, because I think that that's what's happening, is the trade issues and the security issues are getting intermingled. We've got to address the security issues before we can have a reasonable discussion about trade.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Appreciate you coming on.
You bet. Thank you.
This is something that we can do, laying out the facts, moving forward in constructive ways. This is a relationship that we know takes a certain amount of working on, and that's what we'll do.
This is a moment when Canada needs to be united, we need to be strong, and we need to be smart.
President Trump is not president for 2 months, so we still have, a number of weeks to engage. And bottom line, we'll do like we always do. We'll stand up for Canada, we'll stand up for the workers, we'll stand up for our industry.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will meet virtually tomorrow with the country's premiers to discuss next steps. In the meantime, MPs are holding an emergency debate tonight, a debate triggered by both the Conservatives and the NDP.
We need a plan to put Canada first on the economy and on security. Trudeau's got to axe the carbon tax. He's got to lift the production cap on Canadian energy. He's got to rebuild our military and secure our borders.
So far, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have tried to make it seem like there's nothing to worry about here. There is something to worry about. Hundreds and thousands of Canadian jobs are at risk, so it has to be taken very seriously. I think every tool should be on the table. So retaliatory tariffs should be on the table as an option. Everything has to be on the table.
Let's bring in the Tuesday Power Panel. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communications strategist. Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. And here with me in studio is Kate Harrison, a Conservative political analyst. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hey. Thanks for coming on tonight. Lots to talk about. Amanda, what should the government do about this threat, the potential impacts? I don't have to tell you, potentially very devastating, very costly to the Canadian economy. What should Ottawa do?
Of course, very devastating, very costly, very much in its infancy when it comes to negotiations. And I think it's important to remember that this is the government who successfully negotiated with the Trump administration before, came up with a trade deal that Trump himself called the best deal ever. So I think if we were all to uncover every tweet and every promise that Trump made in 2016 and what that looked like during his time in office, we'd see a big divergence. Like he's a posturer. He's somebody who puts things out into the ether and they may or may not come to fruition. But there's time and there's a lot at stake. And listen, this is the same person who campaigned on a promise of making life more affordable for Americans, specifically when it comes to fuel. And what happened today? GM, Ford, Chrysler, all of those stocks dropped today. Those are huge American companies with big influence. We saw the oil industry, the oil refineries industry. We saw oil analysts come out today, people that have been on side with Trump, to say it is critical that we see a free flow of energy for North American security and for U.S. consumers, that to put tariffs like this in place would drive up costs for Americans, and that would be directly in contradiction to everything he promised. So again, this is just the beginning, but it's the beginning of a negotiation that will take place with an experienced team who has done it before.
Kate, is the president-elect just bluffing? Is this just a negotiation tactic? Is Amanda right that maybe this is not actually going to be what comes to fruition eventually? And how seriously should we take what he's pitching here?
We should always take what Donald Trump has to say seriously because he's proven himself to put, proposals like this forward and implement them. And nobody should know that better than the Trudeau team because they have been around the block. I think, the tariffs are alarming. Equally alarming in my view is how surprised the government seems to be that he's floating this proposal out there at all. I think we're seeing a lot of chickens come home to roost on the fentanyl crisis, on the border crisis. Trump is calling out those things specifically. And so I think to engage in good faith on trade policy, as Premier Smith said, we need to get our own house in order on some of these things that have been kind of swept under the rug for some time and not meaningfully addressed. And we can't really get to the point of having a good faith negotiation on trade if we have all of these lingering issues around border security and even things like, our own worker protections related to wages. We have carbon tax increases, digital service taxes, capital gains taxes. We need to put Canada on the right footing to engage in a conversation on trade, and that will force a lot of uncomfortable truths, I think, for the current government to reverse or pivot on policies that they have really made part of their brand to this point.
Françoise, isn't the president being disingenuous about the border and drugs, though? I mean, when we look at the actual data from the US CBP, there was 43 pounds of fentanyl seized at the northern border last year. Mexico, 22,000 pounds. When we talk about encounters, there were 200,000 encounters at the northern border last year. Kind of talk about illegal migrants, that's the word they use, encounters. In Mexico, at the southern border, 2.1 million encounters. So he's talking about issues that, fine, maybe there's work to do. We know there has been a problem with asylum seekers and refugees in this country. We know fentanyl is a problem. But it really isn't fair to compare Canada to Mexico when it comes to these two metrics, is it? He's not really being honest about the problem.
Totally disingenuous, bang on, and I agree so wholeheartedly with Doug Ford. When I heard and I read first last night these tariffs to come from Donald Trump in the same sentence, putting Canada and Mexico, had the same reaction as Doug Ford. So when my friends are saying we shouldn't be surprised, and that's what I heard all day, we shouldn't be surprised. It's almost saying that Donald Trump is right on every fact that he mentioned to justify what he wants to do, which I think is wrong. And that's a wrong attitude from our country. We should not avoid the problems. Yes, we have a fentanyl problem. Yes, we have illegal migrants. But to put all this and try to play our own inside Canada politics, pitting one against the other, we're playing in his hand. Donald Trump never bluffs. He doesn't. I mean, read Art of the Deal. It's not in his palate. He doesn't do it. He threatens and he sees who balks, who will go on their knees. And today what I saw from a lot of our premiers trying to say, hey, I told you so. Oh, no, hey, we've been saying this and that. I prefer the reaction of saying, let's stay calm. Let's unite and have a front and work together. Anyway, it's not Canada that's going to convince the states and Donald Trump. It's going to be Republican governor, senators, who in 2 years will be up for re-election. So that's who we have to work through, because CNN is already passing through the whole list of goods that will hurt the American public. And that's from within, and that will be way more convincing to Donald Trump than our little game. It's not the Trudeau of 2015 to 2019 who was negotiating the first time. He was in a majority government at that time. Now he's in a minority. And let's not play our internal politics because we're going to lose in the long run.
I just have to jump in very quickly. I don't think a strong negotiating position is I know that we're not doing well on these things, but look at Mexico. They're way worse than us. Like, this kid's getting an F. I'm only getting a D. That should be enough to let us get through. That's not a strong negotiating position for Canada. And a Team Canada approach is not just saying that everything's hunky-dory like the Liberals intend to do and that you agree with the current direction of the country. That's not putting Canada first. It's just falling in line with what the federal Liberals say.
Fair enough. I think we just have to look at
43 kilo versus 20,000 kilo.
We just have to look at the facts.
That's not an F versus a D.
Yeah.
It's an A, maybe minus versus a D.
Yeah.
We have to be a bit more reasonable in our approach. It's not facing. That's not what I'm saying, Kate, at all. But I'm saying there's one thing to say, oh, he's totally right, and we told you so. Then and not pulling in together. That's my only message.
I think we can all agree that Mexico and Canada are not on the same level when it comes to illegal migration and fentanyl. I think there may be work to do, but I think for him to compare the two as if they are the same is genuinely unfair and not borne out by the facts. Emily, I hear what the other panelists are saying, that maybe it's not time to panic. It's not necessarily time to freak out. But when we look at what's at stake here, okay, TD economists just put out a report a few weeks back when they were looking at 10% tariffs on Canadian goods, and they found that would shave 2.4% off of our GDP. That's billions and billions of dollars. It essentially puts us into a recession if this was to go ahead. Now we're talking about 25%. So there's a reason why people are a little concerned, right? There's a reason why some people are panicked, because if this does actually happen, we're in trouble.
We are. The first thing I'm going to say is that Françoise said something very interesting about the fact that when it comes to convincing Donald Trump, it's going to be Americans themselves who are going to be the loudest voice. And I think it's really important to mention for a set of reasons, but the one I will stress is that, as you mentioned, this is really potentially grave for the Canadian economy. This is something that's coming from a man no Canadian has voted for, and that might be solved by people that are not Canadians at all. And so I think we need to, first of all, not just panic, but also just take a moment to realize how little power we have over our own economy and how we got there. And I think that's something that all Canadians of all different political parties should be doing a little introspection on. How is it that we have virtually no control on something that could be so damaging to the Canadian economy? That's the first thing. The second thing is that there is a lot of room for different conversations on whether or not Donald Trump is right to talk about the fact that there are some issues at the border or not. There is a lot of conversations to be had about whether or not just saying that Mexico is worse than us is the greatest strategy. What I'm concerned about is when those chats, those basically strategic conversations are happening on national television, coming from different premiers who are basically saying that the prime minister is wrong. When I'm hearing the leader of the opposition saying that the prime minister is wrong, I'm seeing something that, regardless of the validity of the points that people are making, I'm seeing something that to me is dangerous and isn't helping Canada at all. So it's not about who has the better argument and who has the better approach, is where that approach is being debated. I said it last week when there was Radio-Canada making this report about Conservative MPs and having their message being controlled. That's one thing. And I said then, and I will say now, Radio-Canada missed their own headline. Their headlines was that Conservative MPs and MPs from other parties were not talking to one another in the House of Parliament. And now we're seeing the results of that, which is that we now have a political culture in Canada where people are not able to pick up the phone and have those arguments amongst themselves when you have such a huge threat to the Canadian economy. And it is showing in a way that nobody in Canada will pay the price more than the actual Canadian people. And that is, to me, really, really worrisome in terms of our sovereignty over our own economy, but to be honest, in our sovereignty over our own political culture.
Yeah, you mentioned the premiers. Let's actually play a little bit of tape from what we heard from them today.
It's like a family member stabbing you right in the heart.
Adding 25% as 25% tariff would just be crippling and catastrophic.
The 25% tariff will mean about $2,000 less in real GDP per capita across the country.
We cannot start a war, and we have to do everything we can to not have these tariffs.
It's going to hurt every single province who relies on a positive trade relationship with the United States. And it is up to the federal government to change gears.
So much of our economy is built on our connection with the United States, and the importance of that free-flowing trade that needs to continue it's critical to our day-to-day lives.
We're going to stand together, and we're going to ensure that we negotiate from a position of strength.
We have to all come together and be on the same page in terms of how we demonstrate to the U.S. how integrated our economies are and how much a tariff like this will end up hurting the American economy.
Amanda, in my interview with Danielle Smith there, she raised questions about whether Justin Trudeau is the best person to deal with Donald Trump, because there is a rocky relationship there, right? There has been some friction in the past. What do you say to that? What do you say to the idea that Justin Trudeau is not well placed to handle these issues anymore?
Well, I think, today when Poilievre and Singh and Ford and others were holding their partisan posturing press conferences for their own political agendas, the Prime Minister was having what has been described as a constructive conversation with the President-elect. So, I buy a lot of what Emily is saying. I think that this is really an inflection point where the premiers have the opportunity to either stand up for Canadians, truly, stand up for the people of their provinces, take an actual Team Canada approach, or they can continue to posture for their own political interests and partisan interests. And I think that I agree with her. I think that it's a really dangerous approach. I also think that what is interesting is that there are members of the Trudeau team who have successfully negotiated with the Trump administration, who do have relationships with that administration. And I don't think it's going to be a prime minister only approach. It will be an approach that incorporates other leaders within the government and likely premiers. I think, Ford has shown himself previously to be an ally on some of these issues, especially when it comes to the auto sector. So when you take a consideration like, is Trump going to crater the market cap of the U.S. auto sector? And the fact that the U.S. auto sector really has operated like a unified North American sector, there's a lot of industries at play that are cross-border, where there's going to be a united front, I hope, between the premiers of those provinces and the feds as they take this approach with Trump.
Kate, weigh in on this idea that what Poilievre and Danielle Smith are doing is undermining the national interest. We heard Pierre Poilievre say today that the Prime Minister has to put aside partisanship, but then he went on a diatribe about how bad Justin Trudeau is. We heard from Danielle Smith questioning whether he's the best guy to be at the table, and she's freelanced and proposed her own policies to kind of bring this thing to a close, to bring these Trump tariffs to a close and not having to deal with them. What do you make of this proposal and this approach, really, that some Conservative politicians in this country are taking of maybe running counter to Team Canada, to what the Prime Minister and his team have to do? Ultimately, they're the ones that will have to broker a deal with Trump.
Yeah, I hear a lot of the frustrations that premiers are raising, their frustrations that have been raised for a long time, and it comes back to whether or not Canada is on the best footing to have a good faith negotiation on trade, as long as we have some other issues that exist. Again, I don't think that we can engage in those conversations when we're talking about imposing a carbon tax. We can't really have those conversations after just communicating to the U.S. that we were going to be limiting oil and gas production. It's Conservatives that are having these conversations openly. They are the ones that brought the motion forward to have the debate tonight. They were the ones to propose levying tariffs on Chinese EVs before the government took a decision. They have been very transparent about what some of these issues are. The Liberals insist on more meetings together, more meetings of the same people that were around the table last time. And I think Amanda's painting a very rosy color picture of how Canada emerged from that last negotiation. We didn't come out unscathed. So it's Conservatives that have been the ones pushing on these issues around the border, around the fentanyl crisis for years. This has been well telegraphed by them. It's been well telegraphed by Trump. I have no idea why the Liberals are so surprised that this is now the path that Trump is taking.
Francoise, I'm not sure if they are surprised, really. I think they know what they're getting with Donald Trump. I mean, they appointed...
Freeland seems shocked.
Well, she may be shocked, but I mean, they have been preparing for a year at this point now, right, with their Team Canada approach, going out to meet with governors and states, and like they really have been on this. I don't know whether it's been successful, maybe not, because we're dealing with these tariffs now, but I don't think that they're necessarily caught off guard by these threats of a tariff. Are you worried about Team Canada splintering?
I will be more able to answer that question after tomorrow's meeting between the premiers and Prime Minister Trudeau. I do hope that they come out unified. With one mission is to be there for Canadian. I find solace in the fact that yesterday Justin Trudeau was able to talk to Donald Trump. For some people, it might look stupid, but you know what? He makes his statement on his Truth social media, Donald Trump, and Prime Minister Trudeau calls him and he takes the call. He could have told him to ignore him, but he took the call and they were able to discuss. So it tells me a few things, that the channels are open. When you negotiate, Kate, you're right, we left stuff on the table at the last negotiation, but everybody does. When you negotiate, it's always a bit of give and take, and everybody's been kind of raving about the agreement because it could have been way worse. Yeah. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that maybe we can achieve the same thing. Although we have to be realistic, it's not the same Donald Trump. He's in his second mandate. But now maybe his Republican friend will be a bit more voiceful because they have, like I said, to be reelected for some of them in the midterms. So there'll be a different type of game. It's for sure. We're a minority government. That does not help for us to look strong. But I do think that if people are unified tomorrow, we should be on a maybe okay path.
Emily, very quick final thoughts to you, please.
Yeah. Just even if the threat doesn't come forward, it's already having an impact on the Canadian economy in the sense that the threat itself is a factor of uncertainty, and a lot of different industrial sectors will have to look into diversifying their exports so as to not be as vulnerable to threats in the future. And so even though this doesn't go forward, what happened today is already a signal of change for the Canadian economy. And I think a lot of people in different sectors, in different provinces across the country will be looking at how to be less vulnerable to what Washington is saying.
All right, smart thoughts as always from our power panel. Emily Nicolas, Amanda Alvaro, Francoise Boivin, and Kate Harrison. Thanks, guys, for coming on. Nice to see you all.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.